Welcome back to How to Sand and Polish with a Dremel Part 2. Last time you saw what you're seeing right now, which was me sanding dice through the various levels of grit. And now on this one, we're going to do the polishing step. Also the finishing, show you the inking, and the final product. But the last video did cover all the sanding. So if you're just joining us in part 2 and skipping the sanding, you're definitely going to want to go back to that. I reviewed all the materials that you'll need, all the equipment, ins and outs of sanding, and really the sanding and what you're doing there is setting you up for success here with the polishing. So if you like hand sanding, then great, you're in the right place. You can polish from here on. If you hate hand sanding or using the mini pottery wheel, then you're going to want to go back and watch part 1. Otherwise, let's move on with part 2 and polish some dice. So what I've done here is utilize my glass cutting board. You notice that it's really clean if you look down there where I keep dipping, and that is just where I squirt a puddle of the polish compound. And in the first video I mentioned which compounds go with which sponges. So the green sponge is the heavy cut, and that will go with level 1 polish. This is really going to remove the fine scratches. It says starting at 1200 grit, but it's just not as good if you only sand to 1200, which is why I go so high. The finish is just so much shinier, and that is a good after. You can see what that looks like. Here's the 6, which I have yet to polish. We're going to do that in a second here. And this is the before that has been sanded up through 2000 grit. I did this set. So you can see it's still not 100% perfect, but it's smooth, and we're going to dip it in the polish here, give it a once over on there, and it's maybe 15 seconds, 30 seconds aside. The longer you let it have contact with the sponge and the compound, the shinier it gets. You also, same as with the sandpaper, want to keep it moving. You don't want it to sit still in one spot. This sponge is really abrasive. I mentioned sanding errors in the first part of this video, in part 1, and this sponge has caused me a lot of, can't see them, but here they are, air quotes, sanding errors. It has rounded off corners and actually done sanding on some of the dice, on like edges where I applied uneven pressure. It's cut right into the resin, and generally that only happens when the resin is improperly cured. So if you have resin that you didn't mix right, the sponge will tell you. So here is what this looks like after a round in polish level 1 with that sponge. Sorry, I'm a little off center here. But there she is in all her shining glory. Nice and shiny. You can see into the colors really quickly, You can see the colors in there very vividly. A well-polished die is a beautiful die, and I don't say that just because I like shiny dice. The shinier a die is, or a set of dice are, they allow more light to enter more easily, and instead of bouncing off of scratches on the surface, that light can penetrate into the die and illuminate what's inside a lot more easily. So I say simple physics, but simple physics of allowing the light into the dice. And the smoother the surface is, the less interruption the light has for getting into your die, and the easier it is to see inside, and for all those colors to really have their day, their moment in the sun, shall we say. Quite literally, since so many of us photograph our dice in the sun, right? So here we are just finishing up the rest of the dice and going through each face at level 1. I usually will polish. We're polishing here. I will polish every single face of the die on this polishing step, and generally most of the polishing steps. Specifically, you have to get the ones that you sanded. This will bring those back up to like mold quality, demolding quality. So if you have really shiny dice in the mold, this is going to get them back to that level so that they look like faces that you haven't sanded. And in the following polishing steps, in step 2, and if you choose to, step 3, which I have started to use step 2 and 3 a lot more. I used to just stop right here at step 1. I felt this was good enough. And it usually is. You can see from what I had just showed you with the 6, how it took that from dull to so shiny so quickly. And that's like suitable for most dice. Like a lot of people are happy with that. But step 2 polishing and step 3 polishing are just so good. Like so clear, and it just gives it this level of shine that I don't have the words to describe because it's so smooth and clear. Well, I guess actually those are the words right there, aren't they? It's so smooth and so clear, and you can see into the dice so beautifully. Almost too good sometimes, because if I made a mistake or I missed something or there's a little tiny flaw, it lets me know because they're very, very shiny. But again, that's why we're here. Shiny, shiny dice. We wouldn't be polishing them if we didn't want them shiny. And so I really do take my time at this level with the dice to make sure that they are well polished. I'm checking for any little divots or crevices or things I may have missed in the sanding. This is a good spot for me to find mistakes and go back and fix them before it's, really too late. So I continue to sand each face, and then I just plop them into that jar of liquid up there. You really don't want to let this polishing compound dry on the faces and get caked in the numbers. It can be kind of a pain to get it out. Usually a round or 2 in the sonic cleaner and we're good to go. I tend to be impatient and just put it in the sonic cleaner for 1 round and hand scrub it out with my little electric vibrating toothbrush. And sometimes I'll pop it back in the cleaner for a 2nd round if I'm feeling particularly patient, but that's not really my strong suit, which is why I'm sanding and polishing with a Dremel. So I definitely always put it into the jar of liquid to keep that polish, liquid, so it doesn't dry and get caked up in those numbers before I move on to step 2. Speaking of step 2, here we are. So I cleaned up whatever was left of polish step 1 level, got sponge for level 2 on here on the Dremel, and I'm just trying to give you, this is all you really need as far as how much polish is on the face. It doesn't have to be caked in it or drowned in it. A very little just coating the surface goes a long way. And it's easy to overdo it. Not that overdoing it does any harm. It's really just wasting product. And I hate wasting product because then I'm wasting money, and that's just really not cost effective when you're running a dice business. So even if you're not running a dice business, we don't want to waste our money. So just making sure you have a little bit on there is plenty enough. I will dip it into the puddle, and I just zoomed back here so you could see the puddle, but I think my light is a little too bright and washes it out. If you can look there in my shadow of my hand, the puddle is sort of small, but I just kind of drag it out from the puddle so that there's a thinner puddle that's not so deep right next to it, and I just kind of keep pulling out of that deep puddle into a shallow puddle next to it and dipping into the shallow puddle for the face that I'm polishing. And you'll see here sometimes I even skip a face if I feel like I've put too much polish on one face and then instead of dipping the next face in as well, I just turn it and use what's on there. I've also just wet it if I feel like there's a lot of residue, because spinning, it's like a fan a little bit. The rotation dries the polish on the sponge. So if you just wet it down, it kind of reactivates it and you don't have to use nearly as much. So in some cases, I will just squirt a little water on the sponge and that will be enough. It's not always enough, and you have to be careful because, again, these sponges are still a bit abrasive. You can do some damage. So you just kind of feel it out with your hand as you're pressing the dye on the sponge to see whether or not you're getting a lot of resistance or if it feels very smooth. If it feels resistant, dip it into your polish compound right away. If it feels like it's just smoothly rolling along, then keep going. You should be just fine. And so again, it's just a run through each face, and this step, and if you choose step 3, they go by pretty quickly, because again, we're super polished at this point already. We're just further refining the work that we did in those earlier steps. So everything builds on those base layers. The work that you do sanding at the lowest grit of sandpaper up to the highest grit of sandpaper prepares your dye face for these different levels of compound. And the levels of polished compound and the sponge can really only do the work that has been done before it. So if you give it garbage, like if you don't sand it well enough, it will spit out garbage for you. So if you give this a try and you find that your dice just aren't as shiny as you expected them to be, you might need more steps of sandpaper, you might need higher grits. It could be any number of things, but if you just leave a comment, I would be happy to help you troubleshoot, and I will, or you can DM me on Instagram. That's also cool too, which, by the way, if we're not hanging out together over on Instagram, please go find me and send me a message, say hey, let me know you watched the video, tell me what you found helpful, tell me other videos you want to see. I would totally love that. I love talking to people and meeting new people, so come engage with me over on the Instagram. I do have a Twitter, but I'm so bad at Twitter, and Twitter gets so political so quickly, so I just avoid it. And there it goes again. That dye is pointy. The sponge is grabbing it and throwing it. I don't know if you saw that twice there. I just kind of hooked it and sent it flying. It looks like I've got things under control now. But yeah, like I warned you in the beginning of part 1, if you were watching that, then yeah, that is a perfect example of how easy, and that was actually a very tame one. I've had them fly up into the ceiling. I've had them fly across the room. Like I said, I've had them fly and hit me in the face. Shortly after recording this one, I just needed to quick polish a side on one set that I had finished, and I somehow missed an entire face. And so I came back down, I slapped on my respirator, because while you're polishing, you're not really spitting sawdust, we're not sanding wood, resin dust. You're not spitting resin dust or resin muck into the air like you are with the sandpaper. But these sponges do wear down, as you saw in the beginning. The thickness, or rather thinness, of the green compared to the blue, compared to the yellow, they wear down and it spits out particles of that sponge. So I put my respirator on and I didn't put my goggles on, and I got the dye right to the face. Okay, moving on to what we see on screen here. This is that little cotton bit that I like to use, and I'm just dripping a little bit of rubbing alcohol onto the face and then running it under these wool bits, and it just eats any of the thick spots of ink that maybe I didn't clean off well, or if it was, sometimes I just lay it on a little thick, and when I wipe it off with a napkin, or if I use my silicone paintbrush, which if you've seen that short or reel over on Instagram where I just sweep the paint right off, it does 90% of the time work just like I took that video and cleans it off well, but sometimes I miss a spot or I don't clean the brush well and I smear more paint and actually make a bigger mess, which is on me. So those giant like clumps of paint on this Dremel bit with a little bit of alcohol, it just gone. And I've actually since stopped using pure alcohol and started using a combination of rubbing alcohol and household cleaner. It's just like a cheap degreaser. I think it's called Awesome. And squirting that onto the cotton pad instead of the alcohol, because the alcohol dries so quick, it's hard to keep it useful and cleaning the dice if it's gone and evaporated. So doing like a 50-50 mix with the rubbing alcohol and the household cleaner seems to do the trick. And actually, I think it cleans a little bit faster. I don't know what it is about that, if it's just because it's staying wet and it can do its thing. But here's how I use these little woolen bits. So the other thing, I don't believe I took video of this, those larger flat ones. I will put those on here and use the front face of that. So this one I'm using the edge. On the larger ones, I will use the front face. As you can see there on the edge of this one, the metal tip of the screw is actually sticking out through the wool pad. So you do have to be careful with that. I will sometimes layer them up so that I know the screw isn't sticking out through that little hole. But there you can see how clean they are and how that just pulls it right off. Oh, maybe there was some paint left on there. I couldn't even see it. In person, it probably looked really heinous, which is why I showed you. But we just roll right along here and let this rub the dried extra paint off the face that's not in the numbers, because that's not where we want it. And then once that's all done, I will polish with the yellow sponge, which is step 3, and the final polishing compound. And like I said, I don't normally use that one, but for your benefit, I did. So here we're just cleaning off all the ink. That's all this step is. It's not a step that you have to do. And sometimes I also don't do it, but I wanted you to see how I do utilize those cotton bits. So here we are in step 3. I have switched to the yellow sponge. This sponge is pretty soft. I'm never worried about this sponge eating into the dice or causing any abrasion marks. This one is pretty safe as far as that's concerned. And also it's a quick step. So this, I think, in real time took me all of 5 minutes to do. And it's just a quick polishing step to further refine what we've done. Like I said, at this point, all that we're doing is just refining the work we did in those lower steps. So once you've got it well polished, and I didn't include any footage of inking it because inking dice is boring, quite frankly. And if you want to see how I ink my dice, what I do, actually, you know what? I am just going to do an inking video. I'm going to show you how I ink my dice. I can't promise I'll have that one done soon, but if that's something you're interested in, comment and remind me so it lights a fire under my booty, and I will get it done a little bit faster. Which brings me to the next video that we have coming, which is all about syringes and utilizing those instead of pipettes. So stay tuned for that video to be finished. But as I said, this step here is just about getting a final polish, like really a good, I would say almost photograph quality before we clean it up. I will, from here, throw it in the sonic cleaner once I've gotten all the faces, and that will be that. we'll have ourselves a fully polished, inked, ready to list for sale set of dice. By the time you're watching this set of dice has already sold. Actually, it sold very quickly when I listed it up on the shop. But feel free to check out the shop and see if there's anything else that you like if you are into what you see me doing. I love that. And if you don't want to buy any dice and you just want to be nosy and gather inspiration, that's also cool too. I'd love to hear how I inspired you to make some dice. And so we're just going to finish polishing up these last faces. And the only thing that I can think of, I don't believe I have mentioned up to this point, is that it's really important to keep your surface clean when you're doing the polishing. Wherever you put the polish down, you want that to be clean and free of debris. You want to make sure that you're not setting your dice down in dust or any other kind of debris. Any of that can interfere with the polishing and cause scratches and undo your work. So now we just pop these bad boys into the sonic cleaner. I put them in with some hot tap water and a little soapy water. Yeah, that's what I said. I put them in hot tap water with a little bit of dish soap, and that cleans it all off, all the extra polish gunk. You can see the steam rolling off of them. That's kind of satisfying actually on camera. And then I just make sure that I rinse it off, because sometimes the water that has the extra like particles of polish and all the stuff that's just floating around in the water, it sits on top of the dice. So if you pull them out of the cleaner and rinse it off right away, then that water is gone and all that's left on there is clean water, and you don't have to worry about any of that residue drying on top. Sometimes there will still be some, which I'll show you what we do with that in just a moment here, but for the most part, rinsing it like that will take care of any residue left over from the water, should you have residue. And also, just because we like them shiny, I will take this one here if I'm doing shooting downstairs in my workshop. My workshop is in my basement. I'll use the other Dremel that's mounted, but this one here does also work when I'm upstairs in, my kitchen or whatever, which is where I'm at doing this. I just polish those faces off and make sure that there's no dried water residue left on there, so that they're super shiny and super clean and ready to go. And that way, when I go to shoot the dice, it's a lot easier. I don't have to worry as much about how clean they are, because I've already done that step when I pulled them out of the sonic cleaner. And what I actually did was pull them out of the sonic cleaner, and I let them air dry for just a little bit, and then came back and dried them off with a hand towel, and then used the polishing, I think it's a wool polishing head as well, on this little Dremel, to make sure that the faces are super shiny and any residue left behind is long gone. So I just wanted you to see some different angles here. I did try to hold it a couple of different ways so you could see not only what I was doing, but the contact that the die was having, or that the die face is having with the polishing head. It was kind of difficult because muscle memory wants me to use things like I'm using that mounted Dremel. So getting it positioned in a way that you could see was not easy. As you can see, I failed quite a bit here in getting it where it was in camera where you could see it. I'm kind of resting my arm on the sonic cleaner and like over a dish. I think I had another container that I had put the dice in under there as well. So that was fun. But here is what we ended up with. Now, if you remember how rough that looked with the super concave face and the giant nub that was sticking out of, I think it was the 3, we've got ourselves a pretty acceptable specimen of a D6 here. And I did have to go re-ink that. I polished the paint right out of the one. But here's the rest of the set, just so you can see how clear and shiny they are. And this really does demonstrate what I said about the physics of light and dice and how it interacts and transfers. What is the word I want? It goes through. It goes through the surface and gets to those colors inside and really highlights the way that they swirl and their brightness and all the little details. It really is the key to being able to see all those details in there and making people go, wow, when they look at your dice. Because if they can't see what's inside, then they can't be amazed by the work that you're doing. So now we're just going to take a look at the rest of the set here, and you can really see on this one how important the polishing is. Catch all those swirls and the reflective qualities of the foil. It's just, you know, from a set that came from a mold that was basically dead, these dice look pretty impressive and are quite passable, which is surprising since you saw what they looked like when they started. Most makers would have just said, forget it. And here is our last one, our D2, and I may have overlit the shot a little bit here, but you can see he's super shiny and smooth and just chef's kiss. Mwah. So here we go, the whole set all finished. Oops, come back here. There we go. And, oh, there goes another one. Let's try that again. Here is the whole set, all done and polished and ready for sale, which it did sell pretty quick. So that is how I sand and polish my dice with a Dremel. If you have any questions or you want anything further explained, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am way more than happy to help answer any questions, help you figure out your setup, whatever it is that you're doing, Dremel-wise, sanding, polishing. If you need materials and you're overseas, you're in Europe somewhere, let me know and I'll do everything I can to help you out. And make sure you share this with a dice making friend who's tired of polishing and sanding by hand and wants a faster way. Until next time, remember to do the like, subscribe, share, all that jazz thing, and I will see you around on the socials. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye.